In today's photo deconstruction, I'm going to show you how I made an image that pops off of the page using neon green, shutter drag, and color grading. Hey everybody, Lindsay Adler here. Many people know me for my super saturated use of color, specifically the color red. In fact, I've done a personal project where I explored all of the different ways to photograph red, whether it was fashion or beauty or avant-garde hair. And I've explored red. I love red. That hasn't gone away. But recently I've become pretty obsessed with another color. I've become obsessed with neon green, like super saturated green. In fact, I was hoping it was going to be the Pantone color of the year. So maybe next year it will be. I've seen this color pop up on runway shows and in fashion editorials. And I love exploring it because it is such an unusual color. It's not something that blends in with all the other colors you constantly see online. So not only do I think it's beautiful, but I also think it's scroll stopping. All right, so you can see the image here, just how electric that green was. But if we're honest, it wasn't exactly like that in camera. So I'm going to take you behind the scenes. I'm going to show you my lighting, how I got it kind of close, and then what I could do in post-processing to really pump up that color and pop. Plus, I'm going to talk a little bit about the creative effect you see here at the bottom of the frame. So you'll notice the subject's face is perfectly sharp and focused. But the bottom of the frame, you can see little movement, little streaks. That's something called shutter drag, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. Now, before I dive into the lighting, I wanted to mention that this was actually taken at one of my intensive workshops. So I teach workshops here in my studio, and they're small groups. Sometimes it's 6, 12, could be 20, depending on the size of the class. And in those workshops, I give the highest end production value. Incredible models, beautiful hair and makeup with some of the best hair and makeup artists in the world, gorgeous styling. And so this is actually one of the looks in one of my workshops. So if you want to not only learn from me in person, but also create beautiful images, check out the links in the description below. If you go to learnwithlindsay.com, there's actually an entire workshop section. All right, so with that, let's dive into the lighting. So you can see here, there's actually quite a bit going on. So what I want to do is I want to build in each light because every light has a job. Each one is contributing to the photo. But if you look at how many strobes there are, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 strobes and one continuous light, it seems a little overwhelming, but you'll see how they build in. And by the way, I also teach workshops that are on advanced lighting as well as beginner. So I have every end of the spectrum. Okay, so let's begin with the main light here. The main light is on the right-hand side. I'm using a Profoto D2, and on it is the Wescott Optical Spot with the kit lens. What this allows me to do is to create a slice of light on my subject. So if we go over to the image, can you see how there's a little bit of kind of white light just on her face and then down about mid-chest? That is from the optical spot. I can use the shutters, the leaves, to close down and just create a little pocket of light. So we begin there, and the dress you can kind of see in this image is actually green. I saw this dress, my wardrobe stylist Canon, he had it on his rack, and I'm like, I have to photograph that. It's stunning. And so I built the entire shot around that. The direction I had given him is I asked him for something with bright color and movement because this allows me to share a variety of techniques with students. And then the color was just a massive bonus. So start with the optical spot. Then I wanted to start bringing this color into the equation. So the next thing I did is I added an overhead light. So back behind the background, it's literally up above and pointed down. I'm using another optical spot with a kit lens. And on this, I'm using kind of a yellowish-green gel. It wasn't a super saturated green. It's kind of a yellow that just shifted a little bit to the green side. But you'll notice that it's creating a beam of light. And the reason it's creating a beam of light is on the floor, you can kind of see next to my subject, I have something called a haze machine. A haze machine spits out haze. It's basically like fog, but with fog, you see plumes of smoke, whereas haze is just little particles in the room, and you see the haze when it is backlit. So in the case of having the optical spot from above, it creates a beam of light, which you can see in the behind the scenes, but you only see this beam because there is haze in the room. So that's got a gel on it. It's giving me a spotlight from behind. So far, so good. So we basically have a little slice on my subject, then that beam of light from behind, but I want to carve my subject out from the background, pop her out even more. So I have 2 rim lights, one on the left, one on the right. They're exactly the same. They're 1 by 4 foot strip softboxes with grids. The grids help me prevent too much spill of light, helps me avoid lens flare. And then another yellow-green gel on them. Now, these ones ended up being a little too yellow, which you'll see when we go to the raw image. So what I ended up doing is shifting them to be more green and then saturating that green. All right, so we've got those two. And then one more thing that I have over here on the right-hand side, I do have a fill light. I use this in some of the images just to fill in a little bit more underneath her chin and her jawline. Sometimes I didn't use it, sometimes I did. It was just a bare head. And then I switched out a light blue gel and a green yellow gel to see the effect. In this final image, the fill light is doing almost nothing, so it's not really essential. You could definitely get away with, let's say, 3 strobes if you just went with main light and then the 2 rims. If you had a 4th, a light from above is nice but not required, but the fill light isn't adding that much to the equation. The light that is adding something is over here on the left-hand side. It is a 2-foot Nanlite PavoTube, just like you see behind me. On that PavoTube, I have a grid, which helps prevent the light from spilling too much. It kind of focuses it towards the subject. But it is dialed into that electric green that I love. That's one of the reasons I love the PavoTubes. They're full RGB. I can dial them to any exact hue that I want. So I matched it to the dress. And then any of the other gels that were off, I would shift them to match the green of that PavoTube. So that's one of the pros cons of gels versus RGB lights. RGB lights, you can get them exact. Gels, it's often not quite right, but you can shift them in post. In this case, I brought them both together. Now, before we look at the final image, let's just talk about camera. I was shooting with the Canon R5, and I was shooting with the 24-105 4.0. I hadn't gotten my 2.8 yet, but I want to talk a little bit about the camera settings. First of all, I'm shooting at ISO 640 and f4. The reason that I'm doing that is I'm working with the optical spot. And with the optical spot, I want to make sure I don't have to have the light at high power. The way the modifier works, it traps light. It's easier for you to start at a wider aperture and a higher ISO. I usually recommend people, if they're shooting with an optical spot, start at f4 ISO 800, and you're going to be able to get enough oomph, enough output out of it. But the key that I actually wanted you to notice is the shutter speed. The shutter speed is at 1/10 of a second. It's slow, like really slow. And the reason is that all of these lights in the scene are strobes except that PavoTube on the left-hand side. That is a continuous light like you see behind me. By shooting at 1/10 of a second, what that allows me to do is register some of that PavoTube, register some of that green light, and then move my camera, or in this case, I actually had the subject move. And because she's wearing those sparkling gems, as she moves, the continuous light picks up on those gems, which is why you see the streak. So now this will make a lot more sense when we pop over and look at the image. So if I zoom into her dress, all of this blurs and streaks, this is because she's illuminated with the PavoTube. And so over 1/10 of a second, it's creating these streaks of light. But if you look at her face, everything is still nice and sharp. And she was just kind of moving her dress back and forth so it would sway. She's illuminated, her face is frozen in place by a strobe. So now let's back up and talk about all the lights, right? So you've got the optical spot in her face. You've got that green optical spot from behind overhead, creating a little beam of light, which you can see, which of course I could exaggerate more if I wanted. Next, we have the 2 rim lights with the strip softboxes with the yellowish gels. You see those on the side of her arm on either side. I had a hard light fill, which freezes it a little bit here, but what you really see is that PavoTube set to green. So this was the final image, but I want to show you what I captured in camera, and it's going to look quite a bit different, but you'll see what I'm saying. So this is what it looks like. You'll notice that it looks very, very flat. And the reason is I had that room filled with haze. And anytime you fill a room with haze, it kills your contrast. Basically, what it does, it makes everything, you're shooting through the haze, it makes everything a little less sharp, and it bounces the light around a bit, and so that decreases contrast. So you're kind of losing it here. So I did it in post-processing, specifically with my raw converter. But I mean, even if you just look here, watch, I'm going to darken down and brighten up. I mean, even just playing around with my contrast, I just did a curves adjustment layer, makes a big difference. But when I looked at this, now this is where we ended up. This is no retouching. This is only my raw processing. So how did I get there? Well, I did it in Capture One, right, as I'm shooting tethered. But if you go up to like your camera raw filter, now I'm not working with the raw file, I just want to show you. Some of the things I would do is play around with my white balance a little bit. Like I kind of cooled it down and I went a little bit more green. And then I like popped my contrast, maybe darkened a little bit. And so you can see that I can get much closer to where I ended up here, right? And so I started tweaking that. So as I'm shooting, this is what it's capturing, but this is what I'm actually seeing, where I pop the contrast, pop the clarity, cool down the white balance, added a little more green tint, and I actually added just a little bit of cyan to the highlights. Then my post-processing. You know, because of my background choice, which by the way, I didn't mention, my background was a Savage Universal Fashion Gray. It was a light gray, but it wasn't giving me quite the contrast that I needed on the background. So what I ended up doing is emphasizing that. So I darkened down the edges and I brightened up that beam of light. And then I just cleaned up some other issues, like that highlight on the background on the right-hand side. There's a few empty spots at the bottom of the dress I wanted to fill in. So here was the final retouched image. Smoothed out some of the moire on the chest, emphasize that beam of light, but not too much, kind of filled in some of the empty spaces. So this is what it technically captured, but this is where I ended up. Now, I shot a whole bunch of images of this look because I was obsessed with the color. I was obsessed with the scene. Oh, and by the way, one more thing you'll notice. See how in this original one, the highlights were yellow? You can go into your hue, saturation, luminance, or your color balance. You can pick yellow and shift it to a yellow-green. That's how I got it to here. And then I pumped up my saturation. Anyway, I mentioned I shot a whole bunch of different looks of these. One of the things I discovered I wanted is there were several times I wish I had more movement of the dress. Like I wish it extended out more. So what I did is I played around with generative fill. So if you go over to your crop and let's say you extend your frame a little bit, okay? And then the option up top is when you do your background extension, you could do background, which just picks whatever your background color is. You could do content aware fill, or you could do generative expand. And so when I hit generate here, what it does is it extends the background, but also extends the edge of the dress. And so in several of my images, I ended up going for more of a horizontal with just a lot of movement of that fringe. So let's see what generative fill comes up with here. Oh, wait, I do have to flatten my image. It was selected on the background there. Let me just flatten it so you can see. One more time. Let me extend it. In that image, the reason it wasn't working is I was actually clicked on the background layer, and the background layer didn't have the same contrast as the top layer. So it does the generative fill based upon the layer that you're selected upon. Okay, so trying it again. So you can see, just in that one, it extended my frame, also gave me a lot more texture there. And whenever you do generative fill, if you haven't used it before, it gives you multiple options. You can see over here on the right. So I can see which of these fringe extensions I like best for my photo. And then I could also come over here and see if I could fill in more to balance it out. So some of my final photos, I just extended the frame and just made it fill even more using Photoshop's generative fill capabilities. So the end result here is an image I love because it's using that electric green. It's a creative kind of avant-garde fashion, a beautiful model, shutter drag, movement, energy, like it's everything that I want. But it did take quite a few lights and a creative in-camera effect to get here. What I do is I take many of the same ideas, use of gels and optical spots and shutter drag, and I use them over and over again, mixing and matching, and each time it gives me a different result, but it always still looks like my style. So if you want to learn advanced lighting techniques like this, you can go to learnwithlindsay.com and you can check out some of my advanced lighting recipe guides. Like I have Creative Lighting 2. I have classes that talk about gel photography. But if you'd like to learn in person, you can come to one of my intensive workshops, including ones like this, where you'd learn advanced lighting. All right, guys, I hope that you've enjoyed this photo deconstruction. If you want to see all the gear that I was using to make this image, be sure to check out the links in the description below or visit adorama.com. And of course, if you've enjoyed this, be sure to like, subscribe, share with friends because I have a lot more of these videos coming your way. See you next time.